Hello and welcome. We will just let everyone join and then we will make a start. Um, right, so numbers, well, they're still trickling up, but they seem to have settled down a little bit, although they just keep going up. We will make a start anyway. It is, yes, 3 minutes past. Welcome, thank you very much for joining me. My name is Jason Reeves, I'm CIEEM's Head of Policy. We're here to talk about, obviously, the government's plans or planning reform proposals for England. Obviously, there's a lot of interest, a lot of concern been raised with these proposals that came out last December. So we're just going to talk a little bit about what CIEEM has been doing, where we are with our response, and then also what you can do as members. So I'll move the slides on. So just quickly, a little bit of background. I think we all know why we're here, but we'll do that quickly. I'll talk about CIEEM's response, what we have been doing to engage so far, some opportunities for you as members, and then we can have a Q&A session at the end. So a bit of background, we're all here because of the planning reform working paper that was published by government last December on development and nature recovery. It's probably driven in the most part by government's growth ambitions and their stated aim to build 1.5 million homes during this parliament, which we're already 6 months into. They certainly want to move apace at freeing up development and allowing house building and other infrastructure. And this paper is the result of that, we assume. On the face of it, and in the summary from that paper, the ambitions from government seem quite good, actually. Accelerate development. Yes, we all understand that there needs to be more house building. And they don't simply want to drive offsetting, it needs to be nature recovery, and they want development to contribute to that, using development to fund nature improvements, environmental improvements at scale, and looking for win-wins for both nature and infrastructure and development. I think we can get on board with that. The problem, I suppose, when we get into our response is the details or the lack thereof in some instances. I had been hoping that we would have our response ready in order to present that at this webinar. We are almost there. We've had such a lot of response from members, which is a great thing, but it does mean that we've had a lot to go through and to put together. So it'll be another couple of days probably, maybe a day or two, that our response, we're just finalising it. We have been getting comments in right up until yesterday, so we're still just putting the final touches on that. But just as a touch on where we are so far at the moment, our sort of key messages is that we agree with the overall ambitions of better linking up development and getting development to fund nature recovery. And we certainly see ways that the planning system could be better. I think we would all agree with that. As I said, the issue is with the lack of details in the proposals, and often this raises more questions than answers. And certainly by the number of people who signed up to this webinar and who are on now, just how much concern it's raised as well, because I think of the lack of detail, it's just created a huge amount of anxiety, I think, for members. It's certainly been disappointing that central government, higher government, has chosen to publicly and aggressively blame nature for blocking growth. We've seen the Chancellor and the Prime Minister in recent weeks blaming nature. Um, it's really unhelpful to be pitting nature and development against each other, and also unnecessary. There's certainly ways for us to find win-win situations, solutions, as the paper suggests. We're certainly also going to point out that nature delays are multifaceted and it's not necessarily nature. In fact, it's often not nature. I've been in meetings with developers who said that often it's a legal capacity in local authorities or some other element of local authorities that's been the issue and often not nature. The proposals talk about a shift to strategic action, and in a particular case around strategic licensing for protected species. The example that they use in the paper is district level licensing for great crested newts. Some of you will be aware that Natural England has had questionnaires out in the last few months around whether a similar approach could work for dormice and for water voles. I've certainly been told for dormice that the evidence isn't there to do that. But they are looking at these on a species by species basis, and we will certainly be making the point that there's no way you can roll this out as a blanket response to all species. And certainly some of the species-specific organisations have been making that point very robustly as well. We will certainly be making that point. Government's been talking about a modular approach in our conversations with DEFRA and Natural England about looking at this rather than gathering all the evidence and putting together a single proposal and pushing it all out in one piece, looking at it in individual pieces. That in itself is fine, I suppose. It just needs to be holistic and joined up with everything else. It certainly needs to be evidence-led, and we need to do it right. But we also see that there's a strange tension with what central government has been saying. If we go back to the point around the Prime Minister and the Chancellor saying newts are the issue, but the proposals also talk about district level licensing as being this success story. So which is it? Certainly our conversations with Natural England and DEFRA have been that they also want to do this evidence-led, but that the tension comes with government wanting to roll things out very quickly, and we would prefer it rather evidence-led and done right. So there is a tension there. Carrying on with our key messages, moving to a state-led approach, the proposals talk about a new delivery body, whoever that might be. Suggestion has been that might be Natural England. One of our major issues with this is that the paper talks about, or the proposals talk about, that single body being able to author delivery plans, determine whether they will be effective or not, and then also monitoring and reporting on their performance. And that doesn't leave any scope for scrutiny. You wouldn't want anyone to be marking their own homework. So the elements of transparency and accountability aren't there. Natural England themselves have said that if it is them, they don't want to be doing all of those things, but we'll be making that point. On the delivery plans themselves, our biggest issue is with the spatial scale. The proposals talk about bringing up these delivery plans to the highest possible spatial scale. That might work in a sense for something like water pollution, where you can do that at catchment level, or with air pollution. At species level, it's probably not necessarily workable, and we're making that point as we were with the strategic licensing approach, and that it probably needs to be far more granular at that level. The other thing that comes about with the delivery plans is environmental outcomes reports, which are mentioned in the proposals. We haven't had much information on what this means. They were introduced by the last government in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and now Act, LURA. That bill creates the ability for a government to introduce them. So that ability is there. That Act is on the statute books, so they can do that. We just have no detail about what they are, so it just raises more questions. So we're asking about that as well. And then the Nature Recovery Fund, I suppose we have two major concerns with the Nature Recovery Fund. The first one is the adherence to the mitigation hierarchy. We certainly don't want a case where a developer can put some money into a pot and simply jump to doing their development and not go through the mitigation hierarchy. We absolutely and robustly have been and will continue to make the point that we should be working through the mitigation hierarchy, should be looking to avoid impacts and then reducing them before jumping straight to some kind of compensation. And then the second concern we have is around timings, the temporal concerns, the time lag between impact and mitigation enhancement. And this comes about if a developer is able to put some money in a pot, that money then goes to the delivery body, and potentially it takes the delivery body some time, a year, 2 years, 3 years potentially, to work out what that mitigation enhancement looks like, potentially securing the land. And in between, you will have time where we've effectively lost the nature. The possibilities for that raise things like local extinctions, and effectively won't be contributing to nature recovery, certainly not. And if we were to go to a nature recovery fund like this, we would certainly, and we have been advocating for it to be front-loaded and pump prime so that the ecology work is done upfront ahead of any kind of impact. And of course, we continue to make the case that we want to constructively engage with governments on all levels to find those win-win solutions where we can build houses and also help to recover nature. So those are our main key points at the moment. As I say, we're still just finalising our response. It'll be out in the next couple of days. But just, tweaking that. Oh, and of course, sorry, I forgot the last part. There's an ongoing engagement with this as well, that this doesn't sit in isolation. Obviously, we've had things like the NPPF come before it. We've now got the land use framework consultation that's open. We've got the planning and infrastructure bill coming in the spring. It was supposed to be March. I'm not sure that'll still be the case, but spring is what government's talking about now. These things all interlink, and we're certainly advocating for a holistic approach at all of these things integrating with each other. So, just talking about what CIEEM's been doing, we're well aware of members' concern for this, but rest assured we have been doing a lot behind the scenes in engaging on this. So, just wanted to give you a quick update on that. So, obviously, we have been putting it together our own response. We've had a workshop for members, and we've had a lot of comments from members. As I've said, we've been inundated. This has probably been the highest engagement for. I mean, it's not actually a real consultation either, but for the proposals for a piece of policy, probably the highest engagement we've had for probably the last 10 years. So we've had a lot of engagement, so it's taken a little while to work through all of the comments and pull them all together, but we will have our proposal out shortly. We have been working on that, and thank you to all the members who've contributed to that. We've tried to keep news items on the website updated so that you know what's going on, not just what we're doing, but also what's going on, certainly what politicians have been saying as well. We have an ongoing engagement with Natural England, DEFRA, and MHCLG, that's the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. We had a very constructive conversation with them this morning. We've had several previously and will continue to do so. They are very constructive, and our engagement's been very good, and they're taking on board things that we have said. So that has been very useful, and we'll continue to do that. Yesterday, we also gave evidence to the Environmental Audit Committee on development and nature restoration, or environmental sustainability, I think was the technical term. So as you can see in the picture there, Ben Kite on the left, he's the chair of our strategic policy panel, gave evidence. If you're interested in that, the link to all of the content and the video from yesterday is on the website from the homepage if you want to go and have a look at that. But all very much linked to that and feeding into Parliament. We're also going to do, once we've finished our proposal, we're going to do a summary briefing paper, which we will certainly be using, be very short and punchy with our main messages, as I'll come to with where you can be involved. Hopefully that's something that you can use as well, but something that's much shorter and pithier than the full proposal. And then obviously we've been working in partnership, as we always do with most of our policy work, on joint responses, working with the other professional bodies in the sector and also the nature conservation NGOs as well. It's always useful to amplify our message and our voice as a conglomerate, as long, saying the same thing. Something I forgot to say actually in the Environmental Audit Committee evidence session yesterday, the other two people giving evidence in that particular part of the session were from RTPI, the planners, and from RICS, the chartered surveyors, and we're all pretty much saying the same thing, which is a good thing. We've also drafted a joint letter to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor on the value of nature, slightly tangential to planning, but we think there's validity in this at the moment, just to get the message across that in a very polite but robust way, saying that actually there is value in nature and we can do both, and trying to be constructive, but that the rhetoric most recently has been unhelpful. So we're doing that with other professional bodies, and at the last I checked, I think we've got 8 or 9 other professional bodies also signed up. So another way to amplify that message, but also to direct it directly to the top of government. And then through our members, some of our members, we've offered site visits to showcase where success is already happening under the current planning system, where things are possible, that we don't have to completely throw the baby out with the bathwater, where it is possible to do good things. So we've offered those to MPs to come and see. So moving on to where you can contribute. So I just wanted to say thank you to all those members who have engaged with us on this, whether you attended the workshop or wrote in with your comments. Thank you very much for that. A little plug from me just at the moment is, if you are interested in engaging with this kind of thing in the future, please do remember to go and fill in your preferences on the My CIEEM part of the website. There is a box there for policy. There's a whole range of other things you can tick. I think there is one for planning as well. We do use that for engaging with members rather than just blanket emailing the whole membership for things like this. Of course, we would encourage you to respond in your own right. Certainly, once our proposal is out, once our response is out to the proposals, you're very much welcome to use those. There is a short and a long form you'd be able to respond to, so that the actual submission portal on the website is very short. It's got a character limit of 3,000 characters, which is a couple of hundred words, I think, if you average it out. But there is an email on there as well, so you can send in a longer response. We will be doing both, but we'd certainly encourage members, if you're able to do one or both of those. We'd certainly encourage you to engage with your local MP, and this runs through not just this proposal at the moment, but obviously we've got the land use framework consultation, and then we've got the planning and infrastructure bill. So there's going to be an ongoing engagement across a whole range of things linked to these planning proposals coming through Parliament. So if you can engage with your local MP, that would be great. If you don't know who your MP is, you can look them up on They Work For You. Just put in your postcode and you'll be able to find that out. We've also just usefully, the education team at CIEEM have published a simple guide to writing impactfully to your MP, which is a really useful guide. You can find that in the resource hub on the website. And obviously you could use that in conjunction with writing to your MP now, or you could just use our briefing paper. But that's the document on the side there, and is in the resource hub, as I mentioned. I'd certainly also encourage you to look into engaging with your local nature conservation group, if that's something you're interested in. I know the wildlife trusts are very engaged in this as well. And then there are the topic-specific groups as well. I mean, the obvious ones, Bat Conservation Trust and Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, because newts and bats are always the ones that they're targeted, have been very active, but other groups as well, for other species groups or other topic-specific groups have been active in this space as well. So that is a very whistle-stop tour. I hope that's been useful. Thank you very much for joining me. Let's see if we can find the Q&A. If you have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A, and we've got a couple already. Link to the online response form. We can certainly share that. Yes, so the next question, there's no deadline on the working paper. Do we know from government how long we have to respond? So the conversations this morning, they're still taking responses. The link is still open. Um, we don't know for how long, but certainly it is still open and they're still accepting responses. We'll be getting ours in early next week, so we'd encourage speed with that, certainly. There are a number of well-established and effective regional mitigation strategies undertaken by local authority partnerships. SAM and SANG mitigation approaches, will these be subsumed into delivery plans and taken out of our hands? This is one of the things we don't know. So that there's lots of things in this proposal, in these proposals, that just raise more questions. So there's some things like that are already working, but we just don't know. Where is the response form and guide you mentioned? Okay, I will ask if we can send an email out to everyone who's signed up to this webinar and send you the link to the response links and that email. How many people signed up to this webinar? Well, there were over 500 signed up, and now I can't see because this thing is in the way. How many are on with us now? 247. So yes. Has any consideration been given to how the proposals integrate with the amended Section 40 duty on biodiversity? I do not know, but an interesting point. Do we think it is intended to cover the full spectrum of nature topics, e.g. that EIA covers? I think government would like to be able to blanket cover everything. I'm not sure they will be able to. I think in the conversations that we've been having with Natural England, DEFRA and MHCLG, there's realization that it just can't cover everything. There will be several layers to this. They keep coming. Can you make sure that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are aware that their rhetoric about newts and bats is already having an effect that is being felt by LPAs, developers, and planning agents already questioning the current approach and trying to get out of doing the surveys before planning permission is granted? Really unhelpful and necessary, and as you know, but is having an immediate impact on the way that LPAs are currently working and having to defend their requirements for surveys. Yes, definitely. I think the other thing that I didn't mention but that I think is also having an effect on this is that at the same time that we're pushing back against that kind of rhetoric, we also have a capacity crisis in the sector, and attracting anyone new into the sector when that is the kind of rhetoric from the top of government is really unhelpful. So yes, we can make that point. The document says there will be no change to BNG, but are there any signs of this coming? Changes to on-site BNG would be positive. A payment to contribute to restoration at scale, currently frustrating, ineffective with lack of regulation register. So we've had assurances in conversations that BNG will be unaffected by these proposals. It will continue as is. Like you say, there are issues and concerns and frustrations with small sites, BNG in particular. And we are engaging actively with government on that. Yeah. Have CIEEM considered and raised with government the potential impact of the proposed changes on the ecology industry? Strategic approaches, number of ecology consultancies, especially lower grades. Yeah, we're fully aware of that. Yes, it will change the nature of work if this goes through, certainly. How safe are our jobs? I think they are safe. I think Natural England, DEFRA, and MHCLG are conscious that they can't just make sweeping changes to everything, and it's not just going to be quick. The sector might change, but it's not going to change quickly, and there will still be roles for ecologists, and even at those lower grades, that survey work. My MP is a Tory. Is there any point writing to him? In my opinion, only get used as ammunition and dilute the message. I think there is actually. I think because Labour have got such a big majority, actually engaging with the Tories might make them speak up. They've been incredibly quiet. I mean, I haven't seen anything from the Shadow DEFRA secretary in quite some time. Um, I think it is worth engaging with them. I certainly it is. Give them something to say. Has there been any indication for the timeline for the proposed implementation of these changes? No, and that's an interesting point and one we've made as well. And I talked about the modular approach that government wants to take to rolling things out as they come on board and as they've got the evidence for them. Certainly, the higher up government wants to move this along as quickly as possible. So there is a tension there. But certainly the indication we've had from DEFRA and Natural England is they do want this to be evidence-based and to make sure it is going to work. Oh gosh, Paolo's written a lot. From Richard Compton on LinkedIn, the government is proposing a nature recovery fund in place of existing robust environmental impact assessment and species licensing processes for major development and infrastructure projects. But this is how useful the existing water restoration fund has been. Okay. Thank you for that, Paolo. I'll go and have a look at that. Yes, this has been recorded and will be on our YouTube channel probably tomorrow. Also, I'm going to have a media presence commenting on the proposals, i.e. radio, TV, interviews, for example. We have tried, we have attempted to do that, and we always do, and we'd love to be more in that space. The slight conundrum for us is that the nature conservation space is very crowded, and when people want to comment, they tend to go to the big NGOs. So we do keep pushing on that. We're conscious of that, and we do keep trying, yes. Are the government proposing significant additional funding for Natural England to cover the proposed additional responsibilities? We've not seen that, and we do keep asking that question, and in particular, the notion that if we're going to move to a new approach that is enhancing nature and in recovering nature, the idea that it's going to cost the same as the current system doesn't seem to add up. We have been asking that question, yes. What are the implications for the habitats regulations? Are they being rewritten? We don't know. They do mention them in the proposals, that they could be, but we haven't seen anything as yet. How can we be sure the money will be spent where it's needed? Good question. It needs to be ring-fenced somehow. We would have to make sure that it is somehow ring-fenced into nature recovery and doesn't disappear into some other form, certainly in local authorities or in Natural England where they do have resource issues. Please will the CIEEM respond mention the lack of evidence that nature is causing a problem and also the lack of limited evidence that district licensing or BNG is actually working and can deliver mitigation where and when it is needed. Thanks. So certainly we're making the point that nature isn't necessarily the problem. It's very rare that it is the major cause of any kind of delay or problem. District level licensing, we've seen some success, and BNG, I suppose we're very early days, so it's difficult to say whether that is truly working or not. Is there a real will to deviate from EU regs, HABS regs in government, or do they understand the implications? It's a question for government, really, isn't it? In terms of ecological resource, would you be able to push the importance of the natural history GCSE for developing the ecologically literate and ecologists of the future? We have been. It's been really unfortunate that we've seen government come out and say that that's Tory policy and they're not particularly interested in it, but we have been pushing it and we will continue to support it, certainly. The paper seems to merge a concept of mitigation with one of recovery. Has it been clear to you? Well, no. I mean, one of the things I said is that the paper's vague in its assumptions and its proposals. So that is one of the things that we are questioning. Thank you. Reassuring to know that Natural England, MHCLG and DEFRA are receptive to ongoing discussions with us on CIEEM, but have they indicated how receptive the relevant cabinet ministers and department secretaries are to those who've been liaising with them? That's a very good question, and no, we haven't. So that is something we can ask for them. What role for the OEP, if any? Potentially that scrutiny role. So if there's a delivery body, could the OEP get involved in that? The OEP isn't that big. So we would have to be careful about pushing them into that space. Um, but certainly they would have some kind of role in scrutinizing this. I haven't seen anything from them actually. It'd be interesting to get their view on these proposals as well, actually. We could do with reassurance that this push on high-speed growth housing doesn't preempt an attack on the Wildlife and Countryside Act, especially as its review is overdue. I'm waiting to hear that it is out of date, not fit for purpose, and therefore we no longer need it. I haven't been hearing that. I mean, it's mentioned in the proposals that um, there is scope to amend them, as with the HABS regs. I haven't been hearing anything that they're out of date or not fit for purpose, or that we don't need them anymore, certainly. Point about Section 40 duty is that it now requires enhancement, but this requires a baseline. Sorry, Richard, I'm not sure what WP is, suggesting payment for local nature recovery strategies and no baseline. How do they know it's enhancement? Well, we've been making that point as well, that any work that would be moved to any kind of strategic approach, there needs to be a baseline, an ongoing survey. Do you think that the government have the capacity to deliver the delivery plans and strategy nationally? Do they have enough ecologists? Probably not. I mean, natural England is under-resourced really, and we don't have enough local authority ecologists. So that is another issue. Capacity is the issue. Do you have plans to include constructive suggestions on how things should work, as well as just putting across our concerns? For example, going back to your point about the existing system and how this could be tweaked, better supported to achieve the government's aspirations. We have put some things in the our response to the proposals on things we'd like to see happen. We are still finalising those, so they'll be in the paper that comes out in the next couple of days. They suggest district level licensing for other species, but it took years of data collection to make it plausible for great-crested newts. Has this point been made? I haven't made that point, but that is a very good point, and we can add that in. Some assurance the Nature Restoration Fund would not be used to fulfill other central obligations would be positive. Yes, we're absolutely making that point. Also needs to be efficient, not taking a significant money to administer the fund, going to for-profit organizations for delivery. Yes, certainly. We want that money to be going to nature restoration. Are you going to address the concerns around the potential removal of requirement for baseline surveys? We're certainly making the point that any kind of change, anything we move to is still going to have baseline surveys. There will still be a survey requirement. Otherwise, we will not know what's there. How are we going to assess enhancements? Is there inclusion in your responses about the impact, not just to individuals' jobs and to nature itself, but also to small and medium businesses who rely on protected species surveys as primary source of revenue? This could have an economic impact on local businesses. Yes, absolutely. We're very conscious of that. Thank you for that comment. I've seen a few alarming mentions of district licensing for bats. It must be emphasized that they are a completely different issue to either great-crested newts or even dormice. Yes, definitely. That point's been made repeatedly and again this morning that, and they're not even one species. We've got 18 odd species in the UK that it is highly unlikely to work, and we've been pushing back against that. Are you seeking balances with respect to the proximity principle and delivery in accordance with natural processes? I'm not entirely sure what that means, unfortunately. Not a question, but I wrote to my MP who is Tory, and they did reply saying, while there isn't anything they can do at consultation stage, I will keep my comments in mind when Labour brings plans for reform forward for debate. So when that time comes, I will send them another email-friendly nudge for a reminder. Thank you very much. And as I was saying earlier, this was going to be an ongoing process when we get that bill for planning and infrastructure. Are we expecting these potential legislative changes and approaches to have any ramifications for Scotland? No. This is purely for England. I've seen mention of a marine fund. Some clarification of this would be useful. Also, the implications of brownfield passport and lack of individual site assessment. I've not seen anything on a marine fund. We can ask about that though. And implication for brownfield passports, that's come up in a number of cases around this idea of brownfield first and how potentially biodiversity rich they are. And yes, we are conscious of that and have made that point. Initial indications from the spending review in the civil service are not good in terms of resources. Thank you very much for that. There's a separate piece of work we're doing on budget cuts and how unhelpful they are. So yes, we're conscious of that as well. Would you like to also see independent assessment of impact to separate this from developer interest? Sounds reasonable. Will development still be held up if there are delays in implementing the delivery plans or proceed regardless? I mean, we would certainly advocate against that. It's another question we have around the capacity for whoever is developing those delivery plans, how long that will take. We've seen how long local plans can take and how long the local nature recovery strategy process is taking. So yes. Jason, Sally, Ben, and others, thank you so much for all the hard work you put in. Make nature's voice heard. Massively reassuring to know CIEEM is active in this space. Yes, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Given the skills gap, can training for ecologists be state subsidized? So there is a little bit of this that we've been working on with apprenticeships, the lower level apprenticeships, the entry level apprenticeships rather. Some of the conversations we've been having, and certainly this came up yesterday with the Environmental Audit Committee, is that we need more capacity, and something that government could do is to support that development of that capacity. So we have raised that point. The mitigation hierarchy is key. Thank you for reinforcing this. I couldn't see a mention of the mitigation taking place in the same catchment as the development, which is a huge concern. Is there a resource available that people not in the ecology sector can use to send to their MP? My understanding is that people are largely unaware of the effects on biodiversity this will have. All they are hearing is plans for more housing and infrastructure. So we will make ours publicly available. If you want to send that on to people, by all means, it will be publicly available. Anyone will have access to it. Is the plan to have several delivery bodies or just one? We don't know. At the moment, it just talks about delivery body. Doesn't say who it is or anything about separation. Yes, ring fence money, but needs sites for money to be spent on. Have development site paid over 300,000 to pay for compensation for loss of wet woodland, and 5 years later only small amount of that spent, can't find the right land for. That's a major concern that we have raised, is that with the nature recovery fund, is there the land available for any compensation and enhancement work that needs to be done? We have raised that, yes. How is it that the OAP has been disregarded in its function, having criticised pace and detail? Don't know. We certainly would like them to be brought into the process. Excuse me. Do we know if the amendments to the Wildlife and Countryside Act HABs regs will loosen legislation, i.e. so that developers will be able to kill, injure non-district level licensed protected species at site level? We don't know. Certainly the proposals are that we move to a district level licensing approach, but we have pushed back against that, and certainly would push back against any major loosening of the Wildlife and Countryside Act and HABs regs. Need to mention the Law Commission review a few years ago, and the recommendations from this did not suggest that legislation was not working. That's a very good point. I've forgotten about that actually. So the Law Commission did a review of all the wildlife legislation in England, and then Brexit came along and yeah, made a mess of everything, didn't it? So actually we could revisit that. That's a very good point. Thank you for that. If the changes are to come into effect, to what extent could LPA policies enforce their own ecological survey requirements? Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, we've seen differing requirements on BNG from local authorities. Whether they could do the same with this, don't know. Natural England released info about pond banks for district level licensing and grey-crested newts and halting licenses due to running out of pond banks. Will we not run out of land for the other species and more complex habitat requirements if district level license goes ahead for all other species? Will this likely be the case also for land set aside for BNG? Yeah, I've already mentioned we've made that case about, do we know if the land's available for enhancements? How can the fund delivery be safeguarded against minimised allocations with NEC contracts demanding efficiency, government work requiring least cost delivery? that's a tricky one. We can mention that. Yeah. Has there been any indication of what the amendments to the Wildlife and Countryside Act and HABS regs would be? Has there been any indication that this will result in overall the erosion of protection to protected species? So we haven't. There's been no indication of what changes might come about to the Wildlife and Countryside Act or the HABS regs. I mean, the proposals talk about no regression, certainly of protections, and we would certainly include protected species in that in particular, rather than just nature. That would be our view. Do you have any insight into what will happen to the existing LPA-led mitigation schemes? Some have been established for over a decade and are already delivering strong results. So I think that's a good case of where we can point to things that are working, that we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we don't need to change everything. And hopefully in this modular approach, we can point to those things that are working and we can keep them. Housing crisis solutions that avoid green space should take precedence if nature was a priority at all. If there is no talk on getting the 700,000 unoccupied homes being put back on the market, taxing of second homes, student accommodation with housing stock, move to student apartments within urban centres, and incentivising demolition of large properties to replace with multiples in the same footprint, I find these developments zero out in the BNG, but impossible to achieve 10% and are good means to increase housing stock. Yes, I mean, others have been making this case that actually there's a huge job to be done on retrofit housing and getting houses occupied. That's not really our remit, but others are certainly making that case. I think it was Rick's yesterday was certainly making that case around housing, and that we don't need to be building on green space. Thank you for this webinar and information, hugely helpful and appreciated. Thank you for the comment. It is most money currently allocated for Great Crested Newt district level licensing going to the administrators rather than the habitat enhancements? I do not know. Natural England still does not have sufficient funding to update its definitive chalk stream map, even though it requested stakeholder support to update in May 2022, has received many updates from the Rivers Trust in shape format. How can we now be confident that it has the capacity to do more for us? We are making this point that baseline data for anything of these changes needs to be evidence-led, and that we will have to have that in order to make any kind of changes. Do you know what environmental organisations the government has consulted with to come up with these proposals, if any? I do not. Are there concerns that these proposals could lead to isolated populations of protected species, and has this been raised? So yeah, I mean, I talked earlier about localized extinctions. So yes, that is a possibility that we are conscious of. If EIP uses SPTS, sorry, I don't know what that is, based on current regime and devolved nations operate this current regime, does the this working paper, white paper, appear to introduce separate metrics, e.g. carbon is not a measured impact in new ERRs? I'm afraid I don't quite understand the question. What proposals seem to apply? These proposals seem to apply to all developments. However, the response from my MP refers to house building only. Can this point be raised that the focus is on house building, but that the reforms are more wide-ranging? Yes, I mean, that has been conflated a lot. I think that there's been a lot of talk about house building, and then separately there's about major infrastructure, and actually this is about the whole planning system, really. How receptive has the government been to the feedback regarding the proposal? Is there any indication that an effort to create a better has been made? I mean, our conversations with DEFRA, Natural England, MHCLG have certainly been constructive in their taking on board comments and things that we've been saying. So at that level, yes. Higher up is the big question for us. It is my experience that those delays to planning which do result from ecology often come about due to late engagement of ecology services by the developer. While this is understandable from homeowners, it is highly frustrating from developers and planning consultants. Are there any thoughts, suggestions on how this could be addressed, regardless of how the proposals progress. We've been banging on about this for years, so we will continue to do that. But yes, for years we've been saying that early engagement with ecology is going to save you money and time if you're a developer. Is it not more likely that it will take at least the remainder of this parliament to set up and implement these proposals? There's a possibility, isn't there? There's a link to the chalk data, chalk river information. Thank you for that. For info, and you will know this, even without EU, we still have commitments to many protected species under Berne Convention, yes. So hard to see how legislation can be hugely watered down in hope, yes, and that is a very good point. Sorry, I missed the point about brownfield passports. What do these entail? So there is a proposal for brownfield first, as it were, but we've been making the point that actually brownfield can be hugely beneficial, or it can be biodiversity rich. So that needs to be careful, and probably comes back to a site-by-case assessment. We talk about wildlife corridors. How, by doing little plots or areas of wildlife enhancement, ever compensate for the naturally scattered wildlife, such as bat roosts across housing estates? I mean, government's answer to that would probably be local nature recovery schemes are supposed to be joined up and take connectivity into account. But there is the argument that if we do allow developers to continue and use something like a strategic approach, that might be an issue, yes. Not a question, just a note to refer back to the Letwin review as well as the Law Commission. Yes, we have got the Letwin review noted, thank you. If revisiting Law Commission review suggests you raise that Environmental Liability Director is restored to direct use for forecast damage rather than hidden in EDR 2015 without this language. Thank you very much for that. That's useful. Some links to some more guidance. Thank you for that. If BNG is continuing assuming off-site habitat banks, etc., will also still exist, then surely the Nature Restoration Fund should aim higher and target priority habitats and those that are less likely to be delivered through BNG. May be worth making a point about types of habitat and how this should be achieved, e.g. rewilding of land and natural regeneration. That's an interesting point about how these things will coexist, and the demand for land. So thank you for that. Section 13 of recovery paper, weak example of success, highlights need for precautionary principle. That has also been raised around environmental principles and whether they have been taken into account in how all of this is developing. Yes. Science-based targets. Yep, let's do that. Southeast Rivers Trust found more than 80 new chalk streams in its survey and has provided in August 2024. Okay. I should assume and hope that the Nature Restoration Fund should go towards living priorities in the local nature recovery strategy and how this would be decided, where to give the money. Yep, that will have to be decided. Somehow I'd love to see the availability of funding without the bidding war that happens. Surely this would be an opportunity to fairly divvy up the money to cover all local nature recovery strategies. I think that's a good idea. Yes, someone else, I think, thanking for the Southeast Rivers Trust data. To follow up on the comments about early engagement saving money, although that is generally true, it is frustrating and expensive for small developers and homeowners who get surveys such as BATs done in advance and then have to undertake updates prior to planning, application, or licensing. This can be perceived as equally negative from the developer. Yeah, I suppose that's timing, isn't it? Getting everything right. And that's the last one. Right, if there isn't anything else then, I'd just like to say thank you very much for all of that. Where are we with time? 10 twos, yeah, that's a good point to end. Thank you very much for all that. So this will be recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel. There'll be a link to it through our resource hub. I think tomorrow, but certainly by Monday. As I said, our response to the proposal we'll be putting together over the next couple of days. We will make that live and accessible and the briefing paper, so it'll be openly available. So if you wanted to share that with anyone else, that will be a possibility. Certainly do consider engaging with your MP. This is going to be an ongoing process beyond just these proposals. So if you can engage with your MP, that would be very useful as well. And Yes, we will have our response out shortly. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you have a good evening.